there, welcome to a fresh new season of the Open Governance Initiative, OGI. Well, this is season 3, and if you've been following this program over the past year, you realize that we engage public sector leaders, in specific permanent secretaries and their very close directors, to talk to us about their development plans and their policies and programs as well. Now, we've been looking at the National Development Plan 2018-2021, and you realize that this plan is almost phasing out already. But now, the OGI will take a new phase. We're not only going to engage permanent secretaries, but in the coming weeks and months, we'll also be looking at public sector leaders. But today, we're looking at the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, and the permanent secretary at that same ministry is already here seated with his 2 directors to help us expand this conversation right here on the program. But before I bring them on board, just to remind you that you can keep following us on all our social media platforms, on Facebook and Twitter at GRTS TV, and as well on Instagram and YouTube at GRTS TV Official. My name is Fatu Eli Kamuloshi, and when we come back from this break, the permanent secretary and his directors will help me expand the conversation right here on GRTS. Welcome back to the Open Governance Initiative. My name is Fatu Eli Kamuloshi, and like I said in the beginning, today we're looking at the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, and we have the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Abdoulaye Jallow, already here and seated. We have 2 other directors with him here, but we're first of all going to start this conversation with the PS as well as the Director of Development Planning, Mr. Alaji Fadera. PS, welcome to the OGI.
Thank you.
And Mr. Fadera, you're also welcome.
Thank you very much.
PS, we would have loved to have the ministry much earlier when we had almost all the other ministries, right, to look at where we are headed and where we've come as a country. But nonetheless, we're happy to have you here, and we hope we're going to have a fruitful conversation.
Thank you very much.
I'd like that we start by looking at the macroeconomic stabilization and economic management, because we all know how far this country has come from the previous government to where we are now. And in fact, we're talking about a second term of Barrow's governance, which of course is going to mean that we're going to have a very broad conversation today as we're going to compare these 2. But in terms of just stabilizing the economy and stimulating growth as well as transforming, tell us, what has been done so far since this government took over office in 2016, the fact that we've done 5 years already of that term?
Thank you very much, Fatu, for this invitation. Actually, if you look at from 2016 to the end of 2021, significant macroeconomic achievements have been registered so far.
Okay.
Notwithstanding, there are also some challenges which I will also share with you. If you look at when we come in, the fiscal deficit was around the 2-digit level. But now, as at the end of 2021, the fiscal deficit was about 2.1%.
Is that still good? 2.1%.
Yes, that's very good if you are coming from a double-digit level.
Okay.
So, and also before in 2016, the real GDP growth was close to 0 in 2016.
Okay.
And before the pandemic hits, 2019, real GDP growth was very, very strong. It was around 6%.
6.9 around this end. 6%. Okay.
And also, if you look at domestic credit to the private sector, it has it used to be before around 2016 or before that negative. The private sector credit group was in the negative zone.
Wow.
Yes. But before the pandemic, we are having double-digit private sector credit growth.
So what you're saying is that before 2016, the economy was almost close to 0. in just simpler understanding,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And you've steadily you know,
Yeah, the growth,
climbed.
yeah, growth was near zero
Okay.
in 2016. But it was very strong around 2019. But in 2020, because of the impact of the pandemic, economic growth was near zero, 0.6%. And if you look at most countries around the world, they registered negative economic growth rates. Their economy contracted, unlike us. So, and because of our fiscal consolidation programs, we are able to provide a lot of development support, and at the same time being very mindful of our fiscal deficit. If you look at our level in early part of 2017, that was around less than 1 month of import or cover. But now our import cover is close to 6 months. It means that if we don't, if we have foreign exchange problems, our central bank is in a position to cover nearly 6 months of projected import of goods and services in the economy. So it has that.
We are that strong.
Yes,
somehow.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I was going to ask exactly what have been the indicators for this stable growth. Yes, in numbers they reflected, but what has actually been the driving factor for this?
You know, our economy, the key drivers of our economy is mainly tourism and agriculture.
And obviously with COVID-19, oh yeah, so we're still talking about from 2016. Yes. Go on, yes.
Yeah. So in 2016, what has contributed to the sluggish growth is the impact of the Ebola crisis.
Okay.
You know, health crisis generate a lot of economic contractions or sluggish or slow economic growth. We've seen the pandemic and we've seen what Ebola also did in 2016. And towards the end of 2016 also, because of the political impasse, the economy really was not doing very well. A lot of people left the country. There was very limited investments. Yeah. So all those things have contributed to the economy in the later part of 2016 really contracting. So political certainty or national security is the cornerstone of economic growth. Fiscal consolidation is is the most important if the security of the country is very stable. So then you will need a lot of fiscal consolidation. And fiscal performance is at the heart of macroeconomic performance. If government is not doing very well, it affects the entire economy because we control policies on taxation and expenditures, and these are very critical in stimulating economic growth.
But let me just come back to you, Mr. Fadaya. I mean, a lot has been said from where we came from towards 2016 to 2019 and to where we are now. And the first thing that happened and that struck everyone's attention when Barrow took over office was the donor conference that was held in Brussels. Talk to us about the outcome of this so far.
Thank you very much, Patul. I think before talking about the Brussels conference, it's important to give it a background.
Right.
So the Brussels conference was based on a national development plan that was formulated in a very participatory way. Through consultations with citizens across all the regions of the country, as well as different stakeholders, whether that's the private sector, civil society, our development partners, as well as extensive work by government technicians in the form of thematic working groups that eventually led to the formulation of the National Development Plan, indicating the priorities of the government from 2018 to 2021. And based on this National Development Plan, government was able to engage partners in an international resource mobilization conference in Brussels. At the end of the conference, the government was able to mobilize $1.7 billion in the form of pledges.
Pledges.
And I think it is important that we know what pledges are. Pledges are intention, they are promises to support. And since then, we, during the implementation of the National Development Plan, carried out an annual progress report for 2018. That means at the end of 2018, the first year of implementation, there was an annual progress review.
Okay. This was after the pledges were made.
This was after the pledges were done. Then in 2021, we finalized a mid-term evaluation of the National Development Plan. Why is there the need to review? Because you cannot just be implementing without forcing and assessing performance and the challenges that you are encountering. So that's why the National Development Plan made provision for annual reviews as well as mid-term evaluation. But the mid-term evaluation was delayed. It was supposed to be in 2020. But we know in 2020 we were at the height of the COVID pandemic and there was restrictions. We know to do an evaluation, you have to have engagement with stakeholders.
But did you eventually evaluate?
So eventually we did the evaluation.
Okay.
That covered the whole implementation of the plan from 2018 up to end 2020. And from the evaluation, looking at the resource dimension that you are coming from, that's the international.
Very crucial. That those pledges were supposed to be crucial in funding this National Development Plan.
They are. And from the assessment, it was found out that about 1.2 billion has been committed. Committed meaning is signing some kind of formal agreement, projects, etc. But actually of this, that is of the amount that has been committed, 1.2 billion, about 46% were mobilized, were disbursed.
Already in cash?
Disbursed, yes. Guys.
Meaning through the central bank we received some form of... Okay.
You have to understand that some of this implemented through projects.
Okay.
So it's not like direct
cash transfer.
It's not like direct budget support.
Okay.
Probably peers will discuss later. These are implemented through projects.
Okay.
And based on the project work plan and milestones, the disbursements are done to the projects. Though most of the projects have their accounts domiciled at the central bank of the Gambia. But that is not like in the consolidated revenue account. These are special accounts for the implementation of those projects.
We'll come more into that, but P.S., you can jump in here, right? Because we're talking about the National Development Plan and what was supposed to be the major source for funding. Talk to us in terms of just how far we've come as a country by meeting the targets.
Before that, if I can just re-emphasize or elaborate on actually what he has said. We got commitments or pledges of, it's just a promise. The pledge was just a promise that we have the intention of providing funding to your plan.
But did you realize that the Gambians were super excited about that when the news came in?
Yes, I think that's the very reason why this kind of consultations or engagements are important, so that they get to understand what pledges are. They are essentially promises. So when that was done, as he has said, we are very mindful of the kind of debt we take. Number one, we have policies on new borrowings, and we have policies on what he is saying, concessionality. To put it in layman's language, we want the loan to be as cheap as possible. You know, the price of the loan, we want it to be as reasonable as possible. So we don't want to go in for very expensive loans. Even they are very expensive, we just put them aside. But you know, at the donors conference, you don't see, at that time even you would not know what the terms of those pledges are.
Because
so they will just say, yes, I have intentions to support the Gambia and I am willing to provide, let's say, 100 million USD. You wouldn't know the terms then until you have bilateral engagements or you enter into negotiations. Then these terms are known. then it's up to you now to assess the financial cost of those terms, and then decide on whether you agree or not.
Because I was going to ask, really, that's very crucial, because the reason why most countries continue to be in debt is because of, the lack of transparency in loan terms, all right, these implicit terms. What positions or what strides does the Gambia government take in making sure that they're very sure of exactly what they're putting themselves into?
No, especially for developing countries, the reason why the debt is so high is because of your intention to provide as much development as possible. Build more roads, school, hospitals, telecommunications, infrastructure, including the RTS. So you understand. So if you expand your port, build dry ports, so all those things, you have all that list of priority, all that list of projects, but you have to manage the way you are going to fund all those important projects. That's why you need to have a list of priority within priorities even.
And I'm definitely going to come back to that, because it's very important, even though we have all this ambition of, embarking on all these huge projects, but how sure are we making that sustainability also possible in that regard? To put that aside, let's just come back to the NDP and how we were talking about whether we've indeed achieved, the percentage that was needed.
Yeah, he talked about 46%. You have to understand that we are not willing to take all the loans. In fact, internally we have limits on new borrowings.
What are these limits?
So let's say in 3 years, over the period of 3 years, we don't want to take more than $150 million in new loans. So that's a limit. Even with the new loans that we take, the terms of the loan should be highly concessional, or the terms should be, if you evaluate it in layman's language, it's a very cheap loan to take. A loan that you can service in the next 30, 40 years. Because what is important is you look at the present value of that debt. If I owe you,
as the year goes by,
as the year goes by,
value,
because if I should pay you $1,000 today and $1,000 is in 10 years time, it's very different.
Especially that it might not even be a dollar.
It might not be even worth a lot in 10 years time, that $1,000. So that's where you need to look at the conditionality of the loan. The maturity is very important. The interest rate is also very important. And some of the charges that goes with the loans, like commitment fees, processing fees, all those things, you have to assess all that and look at its present value. It's very important.
So none of this is free. Let me come back to you, Federa, and just looking at the NDP in general before we go into the Green Recovery Plan and what's happening as we speak, as this plan is phasing out, right, the NDP 2020-2021, how would you assess the implementation of this plan in terms of projects that have started and those on the verge?
Okay, so when the evaluation was done, actually it assessed the level of progress that has been registered. Of the outcomes that we have, about 63 outcomes in the plan, about 60% of the outcomes were found to be either attained or on track to be attained by end 2020.
Meaning they would have already started.
Yes. And again, we have to put this into context. When the evaluation was done, because it's also important to have some kind of independence to evaluations. An independent team of consultants were recruited to help support the evaluation. And from their assessment, they were able to establish that 60% of the outcomes were either achieved or on track to be achieved by end 2021.
Who were these independent consultants?
No, I think we don't have to go into.
No, just to be sure, when you talk about independent consultants, how do you just source to make sure that there's transparency?
The way it is sourced is that government wants to undertake an evaluation of the National Development Plan. The terms of reference is developed, and that terms of reference is floated on the market. through newspapers, etc., advertisement. And you have what? You have expression of interest from experts.
So they are not necessarily international consultants.
No,
they could
these
be
are
our local people.
These are local.
Okay, so now that you've said that they've, evaluated the whole process, in terms of the key areas, that were at the cornerstone of this implementation of this NDP, which of course I would say agriculture is key, tourism, technology. Which area is really leading?
I think if you look at it, one area where significant progress was registered was in the area of governance. Because if you look at it, one of the areas that was really emphasized in the National Development Plan, apart from infrastructure education, is in the area of governance. And the National Development Plan made provision for all these commissions that we have been talking about and the reforms on the governance. This includes the TRRC, that's the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission, the issues around security sector reforms, etc. And if we look at that, we have made significant, and the constitutional review process, and we will see even after the midterm evaluation, that's 2020, the TRRC has since wrapped up its work, submitted a report to government, and government has published a white paper. So that was an achievement because that was part of the reform. If we look at the security sector...
You've categorized that under the NDP, the plan as well.
Yes, when we were doing the midterm evaluation, that was then the TRRC was more or less wrapping its work. It has not finalized its work, but it was seen to be on track to deliver on its mandate by end 2021.
Okay.
So in the area of education, some of the probably previous programs by the sector experts would have given you the details of this, but we have seen significant progress in the area of access.
And that's what I'm interested in, the programs, yes, which we can see.
In the area of access to education, including at pre-primary, ECD, because the Ministry of Education has this policy of annexing ECD centers to primary schools, especially in rural areas where supply was limited relative to the urban areas.
So when it comes to infrastructure and technology?
Yeah, if we look at infrastructure and technology, we would have seen significant investments in infrastructure. At midterm evaluation, that means by end 2021, end 2020, that the midterm evaluation covered about over 250 kilometers of feeder roads were constructed. And then we also had the road network in URR, which was estimated at about 40 kilometers.
I know this is all part of the plan.
This is all part of the plan. And the two bridges in the eastern part of the eastern part of the country, and also the rural electrification project. These were all part of the infrastructure component of the National Development Plan.
So it does not matter now, the timeline and the dates. As long as we have a crisis, we have to increase another time.
That's why when you look at planning is not like you don't cast anything in stone. Okay. You have to be flexible.
So for example, if for example, I am not saying it, that for example, Barrow did not succeed another time, another government comes in, they would have continued with this plan and adjust accordingly.
Because like if you look at planning itself, we embark on what? We embark on this process of formulating a new plan in 2021. But the consultations and the interactions take time, because as we speak, in terms of formulating the Green Recovery Focused National Development Plan and a long-term vision, we have done consultations across the length and breadth of this country. All 120 wards were visited, and we consulted with all the stakeholders, whether these are women, young people, the elderly, persons with disability, and we have done bulk of the consultations at the national level. As we speak, the sector working groups that consist of experts in government are going to convene to look at the information that is coming from all these consultations, also their existing strategies as well as policies, so that we will start discussing on what are the emerging priorities before further consulting and confirming with our stakeholders. Speaking about climate financing, the first point is to ensure that you are able to mainstream climate change into a development planning process.
When you look at the National Development Plan, I would say indeed on paper it's been mainstreamed.
But in reality, you don't think it is?
So in reality, I'm just asking whether there has been much resources driven towards this?
Yeah, because if you look at it, like, for example, if you look at some of the interventions, for example, you look at the energy sector, very soon, given the pipeline projects and the intervention, a greater part of our energy supplies will be from renewable sources vis-a-vis fossil fuel. This is climate sensitive. If you look at a lot of the projects that are being implemented in agriculture, they are climate resilient projects to make sure that our people, our farmers, are resilient in the faces of a changing climate. So in actual fact, it is not just on paper, but this is being translated into practice.
Okay,
actually, it is happening.
Okay.
In the energies, in all sectors now.
But this is how you make sure that these sectors are really in their budget or in their program proposals, the mainstreaming?
Yeah, if you look at the major investments or major projects, they are all climate sensitive. In the energy sector, as you have said, if you look at our energy mix from 2016 to now, it has significantly changed. Now we are getting energy from hydro, from gas, renewable. We are doing a lot of investments now in renewable energy, and we are expanding it, particularly in solar now. Recently, the World Bank has announced a $68 million investments in tourism. A significant amount of that is climate sensitive because it's going to, we want to make the coastal areas resilient to climate change. Yeah, so.
I'm just going to put a pause to that because I think it's a very interesting conversation we've had. And Federa, I would have loved that we expand a little bit more on the Green Recovery Plan and what is going to really be the focus for this plan in just 20 seconds. Can we do that before we go on a quick break?
Okay, I think the whole idea is to have a green recovery focus. Green to make sure that while we are developing, we also address environmental challenges and make our people resilient. So that is why the focus is on green recovery. Recovery to also ensure that some of the challenges that have been elevated by COVID-19 pandemic are addressed in our new plan, so that it's not business as usual.
Okay, yeah, indeed. I mean, Federa, many thanks for joining us here. But before we have the next director join us, who's going to be Mr. Babukar Job, the Director of Economic Policy and Research, we'll just go on a very quick break and be right back. This is OGI, stay with us. Welcome back to the Open Governance Initiative. We're still here with the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs. And joining us now is the Director of Economic Policy and Research, Mr. Babukar Job. And we, in fact, still have the Permanent Secretary here, and we're going to have him throughout this conversation. But Mr. Job, it's great to have you on OGI. Very well. And Piers, before we went on the break, we were just talking about, you know, the plans for the green recovery. I know that we still have not finished everything that was supposed to be implemented in the NDP, but we're looking at a new plan now.
Yeah, you know, plans have durations, so it is up to the government to decide on a 3-year plan, 4-year plan, or 5-year plan. Okay. And when the plan expires, then you
modify,
you assess what has happened, what were your achievements, what were your challenges, and the lessons you have learned from that, and you use that to develop another plan.
Okay. So in terms of the financing and where that is going to come from, because in terms of the issue of debt, has it in any way stopped us from further, you know, implementing our programs in any way?
No, we'll continue to take debt in nominal terms.
What do you mean in nominal terms?
Let's say if I take 10 million USD, that is taking that in nominal terms. That's not a present value of debt, for example. So we'll continue to take debt, but invest it in areas that will generate the returns that may end up offsetting the cost of that debt.
And that is what I want to ask, and I'll come to you, Mr. Joe, because in terms of just creating those programs and plans that can service this debt, but in turn, also creating revenue for the country, has that been done? Are we in fact in debt distress still?
We are borderline debt distress. But I think what the Permanent Secretary has said.
We are borderline
In debt distress.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
But you have to take it in the context. You have to also understand where we're coming from.
Okay.
Prior to 2020, 17, you realize that our debt to GDP was over 120%. Obviously, with the rebasing of the GDP and also the fiscal consolidation that government has actually been implementing.
And I have here the risk for overall and external debt remains high, as per December 2021.
Yes, it is elevated. But these were also the fiscal consolidation measures that the government is implementing is geared towards actually reducing the trajectory of debt.
What are those? Yeah.
It has to do with the level of investment, like the Permanent Secretary said, because obviously the appetite for this government and appetite for the demand that is actually coming in terms of development is extremely high. Not only are we talking about road construction, but we're also talking about making sure that energy is also consistent as well. You would have seen that that the frequent outages that we used to have before has actually reduced, albeit recently that has actually come about again. But the efforts and resources that we are pumping into that area is actually to make sure that within the next couple of years we have energy self-sufficiency in energy, and that's the plan that by 2025 at least the length and breadth of this country will have access to energy.
I mean, in terms of, in fact, our access to energy, are we self-sufficient in that endeavor?
As of now, we are not, and that's the reason why the plan is making sure that by 2025 the length and breadth of the Gambia would have access to energy, and not only access to energy, but also clean energy, because you have a sort of the idea is to have what's it called again, is to make sure that we are not only looking at fossil fuel, but we are diversifying the portfolio for energy. You have you have solar, which we are actually working on implementing right now. We have a solar park in Jambu, about 20 megawatt. We also have energy coming all the way from Guinea through the OMVG project, and that is through the dam there. So we are trying to make sure that at least we are not only relying on fossil fuel, and that's the reason why you see government actually expanding on all of this area, because when you have crises like what we're currently experiencing in the form of Ukraine, you see that oil prices have actually shot up. So that in itself also affects the energy that eventually NAVEC ends up charging the consumers.
We'll look into that in detail also, but I'm also interested, how about accommodation, transportation? Are these not areas that you could actually also build on and invest in for more sustainability in terms of debt servicing, but just income generation in general? PS.
There are plans to promote public transport.
Because we're still talking about being sufficient. I mean, I know no country is an island, right? But also our spending capacity and just how it translates into the revenue we're able to get, and not purely based on tax.
Let me go back to the question you raised. We are assessed to be at high risk of debt distress, but our debt level is deemed to be sustainable. The reason why that is deemed to be sustainable is the current fiscal policies that we have. As Babukar has said, we are following up on fiscal consolidation. Even the reason why in 2021, at the end of 2021, if you look at our fiscal position has doubled compared to 2020, it's because of some of the shocks we had in 2020 and government's appetite to do a lot of investments in infrastructure. Very soon we'll be coming to promote public transport in the area of the use of public buses. That has been ignored for decades now.
It's what's in developed countries.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it will also help to ease some of our traffic congestion that we have. So we are working on trying to promote that. Very soon, in the next 4 or 5 years, we will beginning to see the results.
I mean, I'm just interested in just ways and just specific ways that you're working towards sustaining the debt. But let's also go back to 2019 and when, you know, your lenders also made a pronouncement of debt relief at the spring meetings in 2019. Has that in any way improved your spending capacity? The fact that, you know, you have this debt relief over a period of years and now you don't have to be really worried about servicing the debt, but you can invest in more pressing issues.
Exactly, that's exactly what those resources were used for. The debt relief was given for a period of 5 years, all means that it will be expiring in 2025. So the resources that you would have been using to pay off this servicing this debt, you were actually expending in poverty-related expenditure.
Has that been done?
That's,
from 2019 to where we are now?
well, that's the reason why you also see an expansion in fiscal policy in the areas of these public investments that you are actually, and hoping that those public investments would also yield the returns that they actually needed, so that when it comes, when the time period elapses for you to start paying the debt in 2025 and beyond, you also have those additional resources.
You mentioned in terms of the public investments, you mentioned energy. Are there other areas that have been really, you've been really driving attention towards?
One of the things that we are also working on, which the PS alluded to earlier on, is also digitalization.
Okay.
I think what is going to happen is that government is going to spend a huge chunk of resources in the millions of dollars in terms of making sure that the economy is fully digitalized. And this will also, because right now we're actually facing the benefit of it. You don't have to go queue in the banks to make sure that certain payments are actually made. We actually want to extend that to the general public, and also because you also see teachers right now actually receiving their salaries without even going to the bank, because payments are actually done through their mobile phones. So all of these are actually investments that government is actually doing, and we are also looking at expanding it.
I'll come into that as well, as I have a whole conversation on financial inclusion as well. But when we also talk about the extended credit facility that the IMF has approved for the country, PS, and I'm sure this comes in phases, and I know, where has this been, you know, concentrated in? I mean, in what areas have you been driving these resources towards? Because it came during the COVID-19 pandemic as well.
Actually, let me start with the savings that has been generated, i.e. the fiscal space that has been generated as a result of that debt relief. Currently, if you look at the Banjul roads, it's funded by government. You look at the Hakalang, the North Bank roads, lot 1 and 2 in the rural areas. So many of those roads are funded from our own resources. It's because of the debt relief, that space it has created. That's the reason why we have that additional resources to be able to spend them on not only IT infrastructure, but also on roads.
I mean, when we also talk about how COVID-19 has exacerbated the inherited challenges, how has it further affected your spending?
Yes, it did, because if you look at the Supplementary Appropriation Act of 2020, government had to spend about 3.6% of GDP to support the telecom sector, to support the tourism sector, the aviation industry, and support also the schools. Yeah, so spending significantly went up in 2020 in response to the pandemic. There was also a cash transfer program. For the first time, we are having a cash transfer program of that magnitude. Because a lot of households, especially rural households, we are giving cash on a monthly basis, and this program is still going on.
So this is a government-supported program.
Yes, it's a government-supported program.
Okay, so some of the COVID-19 funds, if we are going to put it, because people would ask, where are the COVID-19 funds? So some of those funds have been given to poor families, if you're going to say?
Of course, yes. If you look at it, a lot of rice, oil were purchased in 2019 and were distributed to poor households that were really affected.
Okay. Mr. Job, poverty rate reduced from 9.2% in 2020 to 8.5% in 2021. What has been the key indicator for this?
I think it's the reverse. Poverty rates have actually gone up from about 48% to about 52 to 54%.
Is that in 2022?
After COVID.
Okay.
After COVID, because what you had is the exercise that was done that led to 48%. Now with the COVID and all of these challenges that we're currently facing, it has actually put in a lot of individuals in much more dire straits.
I'm glad that you said it has increased, because that was going to really determine my next question, because we are faced with increase in prices of goods and services, right? So what has been done to really alleviate, you know, the struggle that families are faced with, especially those vulnerable families? You mentioned that there has been cash transfer, but how sustainable has this been, really? Was it only in 2020? Has it continued? You know, families are still exposed to the vulnerabilities of this public crisis.
Yeah, actually, it's still going on for the next 2 years, and we are thinking of also even extending it. But we are currently doing the assessment to see how much we can, by how many resources would be required to extend the cash transfer program. Well, remember that not all regions in the country benefited from the cash transfer program, and it is important that we are in the process of developing a social registry. We need which contains the household characteristics, because this will help us to do more targeting as far as the cash transfer program is concerned, so that we are very mindful that only the poor households who are really deserve to be provided with financial support actually benefit from the program.
Okay, so before I move on to Joe, back to my question on the ECF and how just you're implementing throughout the various phases. In what areas are you driving this finance into?
In all areas.
Okay.
We are looking at revenue reforms, public expenditure reforms, reforms of state-owned enterprises, public procurement reforms, and also apart from that, there are also policy targets that are inbuilt within that program.
So these are not the tangible things that we can see. They have to do with institutional reforms. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they are mainly policy and institutional reforms.
Okay, so we're still yet to make headway in terms of the institutional reforms, and still government is putting much financing into this. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you know, institutional reforms don't happen overnight.
I understand this.
Yeah, so it takes a lot of time, and it requires a lot of investments also. Reforms goes with a lot of investments in terms of resources. And because of that, you are limited in terms of the speed of your institutional.
I mean, Mr. Job, in improving evidence-based decision-making, we should also cater for fair allocation of resources. I know that a public finance management system is crucial in line in strategic priorities, and it's supposed to be one of the indicators for this growth recovery strategy, plan that we are embarking on. Talk to me about the coordination that's going within institutions for this PFM system.
We have a specific directory that is actually responsible for public financial management at the Ministry of Finance that is actually coordinating all of these PFM reforms that the government is actually embarking on.
Okay, so it has started and it's working well.
It is working well. Yeah, exactly. I think, like the permanent secretary just mentioned, you have all of these policy initiatives that you're actually working on, because you have to understand also that in order for these things to work, you have to build those institutions, and those institutions have to be strong enough so that they will be able to stand the test of time.
But are we going to continue building these institutions and giving them much, they're taking the bulk of the resources and then forget we have poverty, health, you know, and all these situations?
That's where I wanted to drive at. It's not only the institutions, but the resources that we are talking about is actually the savings that you are making from these deferral of debt is actually redistributed when you are actually doing your budget.
Right.
To all of the institutions, to all of the ministries, departments, and agencies. So in effect, you see lots of things actually happening in the areas of security, in the area of healthcare. So these are the areas that you see those resources actually being redirected.
And that brings me to the issue of the debt. The budget rather. Let's talk about that and where our main source of funding comes from. Yes, if I may just come to you.
Our main source of funding comes from our taxation. It's our main source of funding. That is tax revenue. And secondly, also our partners are providing also a significant amount of resources to support our development program.
I was going to think that most of the funding comes from external, external donors, or you were saying it's mainly from tax.
Yeah, most of our infrastructure financing is coming from external partners, either in the form of loans or in the form of grants. If
the main source of funding comes from tax, then that means life then becomes increasingly difficult for Gambians, especially with what we are faced with. We're faced with a poly crisis. How do you reconcile this?
If you look at the country, for quite a number of years now, if we are not reducing taxes, we have not been really increasing taxes. Our tax rates has remained fairly stable for a number of years. But maybe what we need to also focus on is to increase our tax base to make sure that those who are supposed to pay taxes.
You mean to broaden it, yeah?
Yeah, to broaden the tax base, just to make sure that those who are supposed to pay taxes pay tax.
Well, we're running out of time, but quite a number of subsidies we've been hearing recently as well with the farm agriculture aspect as well. I'm not going to say that the government is doing extremely well, but I think that the trajectory with which you're taking, at least we're seeing some development strides been taken from your ends and just consolidating what's happening in terms of just this poly crisis. But hopefully all of that can gain fruition in a very short time. But as we speak, the public is really going through a lot and prices continue to rise. P.S., what would you say in this endeavor?
It's always good to compare with other countries. Even in the United States, they are all experiencing price hikes all around the world. That is the complaint. And the people in the country also realizes that the Russia-Ukraine war is the cause of all this problem. And then, but what we can continue to do as a government is to provide areas where we think that we can give subsidies to, because basically that's not only subsidies, and also increase our cash transfer program to make sure that the most vulnerable are to some extent resilient along the way.
Very well, and that's the aim. But Mr. Job, the outlook for 2023, just briefly, I know we are halfway through 2022. I'm not sure it's the best year so far, would you say?
Not really the best, but we are optimistic that we will be out of the woods very soon, hopefully. And like the peers actually said, I think where we are focusing on is to make sure that the policies and programs that we're implementing actually benefit the people, because that's the ultimate objective of the government. Challenges are still ahead, but we are working together at least as a unit to make sure that at least we're able to surmount those challenges.
How do you decide which sector gets the highest budget? For now, it's education, right? Do they continue to get this? What's the indicator? Yes, please.
No, actually, if you look at education, They continue to have the highest budget because if you look at it, they have more schools in this country. It's over 3,000 or 4,000.
That's quite a lot. Basic
It's
secondary schools.
Yeah, so that's the reason why they continue to consume the greatest chunk.
And we will see this budget for a long period of time.
Yes, for a long period of time,
okay.
Because governments is focusing a lot on especially basic and secondary education. Because ideally what you would want is to have all your citizens educated. They get some level of basic education. Yes.
Very well. And the citizens, Mr. Job, have their own views been validated in this budget?
Yes, I think that's the reason why the ministry also engages in what we call the citizens budget, where we take the budget and take it back to the citizens and show them exactly that these are the areas where we are actually spending the resources that we are mobilizing on a yearly basis. And we do get our feedbacks, and it also informs the budget preparation, because we are about to start budget preparation for 2023, and some of those comments that we received from the consultation process actually feeds into
that. All right, that's good to know. What I'll do now is we've completely run out of time, but I want to take just a few questions on our social media platforms, because this is the citizen engagement part that we bring into this program. But I think for some reason people are running away from finance and all the conversation that comes around that. And just one thing I see these days and I've seen is that people are concerned about the $100,000 that the NAMs will receive for their clothing allowance over the period of their mandate. Pierce, what's your take on that? People feel that the NAMs should not receive $100,000 for clothing allowance, that there are more pressing issues than this.
Well, the NAMs are accountable to people. That's why they are elected every 5 years. So if they are not happy about the policies of the National Assembly, well, they have the power to make changes.
Who approved this 100,000?
Well, it is the NAMs who are responsible, or the National Assembly, for approving the budget, which includes the budget of the National Assembly.
But this is 2022. It was not captured in the 2022 budget, but here we are. How did that come about?
No, it must be captured.
It must be captured. Yeah, so just today I was reading on the newspaper, and a former NAM said that he is not aware of any clothing allowance being captured in any budget.
Maybe I would refer that to the NAMs to answer this question, because they prepare their budget
and give it to you.
No.
You are not responsible for NAM and their budget.
We just consolidate the budget. You know, there are certain institutions like the Independent Electoral Commission, the National Assembly, the judiciary, and the National Audit Office. These are independent institutions that are established under the Constitution. And because of that independence, they prepare their own budget and send it to the office of the President. We just incorporate it, and if we have any concerns, we can present those concerns to the National Assembly. But it is the responsibility of the National Assembly to approve the budget.
Okay. I mean, we are going to draw it at that, but Mr. Job, thank you so much as well. We had Fadera earlier here, and we're looking forward to a promising 2023 budget, if you would ask me. P.S. What would you say before we let go of you? I know that these are hard times for everyone, and when it comes to just elevating the livelihoods of the people want more, flexible terms.
Yeah, that's why if you could recall, the government has taken the decision now to migrate the current pay structure into a new pay structure, and one of those measures is to try and improve the living conditions of civil servants, and then we'll continue to do as many cash transfer programs as possible, and that's the very reason why we want to get a comprehensive social registry that will capture, the household characteristics of all households in this country. We've done it for all the regions except around this area, the Greater Banjul area.
So we can be hopeful for the coming years.
Inshallah.
Right, that was the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, Mr. Abdoulaye Jallow, there together with his two directors, Mr. Elaji Fadera as well as Mr. Babukar Job, talking to us there about their plans and programs and as well what we can hope in the coming years. But this was all we had time for today on this program. It's been myself, Fatu Elika Mloshi. Continue to follow our social media platforms on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube for any comments that you want to send on this program, and subsequently the guests will be bringing for you every week here on Monday. Till I come your way again next week, have a great program.